Want to vibe with your books without turning off your brain? I promise, it is possible. If you're new here, I'm Steph, a lover of all things stories. And if you're anything like me, you love sinking into a story. But you also find yourself thinking, wait, was that problematic? Or maybe, what exactly is this book trying to say? Today we're talking about how to read critically without ruining the fun, so that you can still enjoy the story and engage your brain. Because reading can be both a source of joy and a place for reflection. You don't have to pick just one. I think there's this weird myth going around in the book community that you can either read for vibes or analyze deeply, but never both. Like, suddenly if you start picking apart a story, you are the killjoy in the group chat. But ignoring flaws or the deeper message doesn't protect your reading experience. It just makes it shallower. On the other hand, sometimes you want to turn your brain off, especially if you're using reading to escape from this really chaotic world. I get that. I do. But what if actually thinking critically could enhance the vibe instead of ruin it? The challenge is that when you start to read things critically, you start to notice things that are uncomfortable. Power dynamics you didn't notice before, tropes that carry baggage, and messages that hit differently depending on who you are. And when this happens, it's easy to feel like you have to pick a side, either dismiss the book or pretend you didn't notice. I'm here to challenge this black and white thinking. I want you to realize that it is okay to be uncomfortable with something in a story and still enjoy the story overall. Critical reading isn't about policing your fun. It's about making room for more informed fun. And that's a vibe worth chasing. Whether you choose to do this during your reading experience or sit down afterwards is really entirely up to you and your preference, but I would highly encourage you to give it a try. Here's how you can stay reflective and have fun while reading. Number 1, know your intention before you start reading. Are you reading to learn something new? To feel cozy and safe? Or to challenge yourself? Letting yourself answer these questions up front helps you set your boundaries for your reading experience. You might want to read a dark fantasy and examine its social themes, or you might just want a break and crave banter and magic. Either way, knowing your why helps you to engage without feeling any guilt either way. When you pause to clarify your intention before cracking open a book, you are giving yourself permission to experience it on your own terms. This is especially helpful when you know that certain genres or topics tend to affect you more deeply. Maybe you're in the middle of a really stressful month and just don't have the bandwidth for a really complex political allegory. Or maybe you're itching to dive into the cultural commentary in a novel with your book club. Either way, knowing what you want out of an experience will keep you from being blindsided, disappointed, or defensive if a book doesn't match someone else's vibes. And if you change your mind halfway through, that's totally fine. You're allowed to shift from just for fun to full-on analysis mode, or vice versa, based on where you're at. You're also allowed to say, this is not for me, or this is not for me right now, and to set aside a book that's not serving you for any reason, whether you're not in the right headspace or the content is particularly triggering to you. Intention doesn't box you in. It frees you to connect more deeply with what you're reading. I also have a personal theory that doing this will help avoid reading slumps. I know that my intention changes all the time. When I'm reading for, say, a book versus adaptation video, I'm taking notes and paying close attention to structure, character arcs, and themes, especially anything that's changed between the two media formats. When I'm reading for book clubs or arcs, I know that I'll need to explain why I liked or didn't like something. I'm typically more focused on coherence, pacing, and payoff. But when I'm just reading for fun, I let myself let go and just enjoy the ride. All of those modes are valid, and they let me connect to books in different ways. Number 2, ask layered, curiosity-based questions. Once you've set your intention, the next step is to engage with your book through questions that open up the story, not shut it down. Instead of trying to figure out whether a book is good or bad, because let's face it, that's all just a matter of subjective opinion, try shifting the goal to discovery. What can this book teach you? How can it surprise you? Where does it reflect something important, or where does it fall short? Here are 3 powerful curiosity-based questions that can help keep you engaged without losing the vibe. What is this book saying about the world? Every book, whether it's a gritty dystopian fantasy or a cozy romance, has something to say about the world, whether it's done intentionally or not. As a writer, I can confirm that I almost always have a greater thematic story that I am trying to tell aside from just the plot. And that may not be the case for other writers, but I can guarantee you it is always there. Sometimes that message is empowering, like powerful women leading rebellions or marginalized characters finding joy. Other times, the message might be unintentional, like romanticizing toxic behavior or glossing over injustice. Asking this question helps you tune in to the book's values and themes, not just the plot. It's almost like asking, what story is this book really telling? The second question you can ask about your book is, who gets to have power or voice in the story? Pay attention to whose perspectives get attention and which ones are sidelined. Who gets agency, growth, and happy endings? And who doesn't? Are the villains always part of a certain group? Are the love interests only described in one way? This question is especially useful when the story is set in a real-world setting or examines social structures. It doesn't mean that the book has to be perfectly balanced, but it does give you a sense of where the author is putting their narrative weight. And that awareness helps you read with sharper eyes, and might even help shed some light on your own reading habits, like what kind of main characters do you enjoy, or what villain archetypes are more interesting to you. Knowing the answers to these questions will help you down the line pick other books that you will enjoy, thus minimizing any disappointing reading experiences. The third question you can ask is, how does this book reflect or challenge real-life beliefs? This one is my favorite. Every time I dive into a book that has morally gray areas or big social questions, whether intentionally or just by coincidence, I ask myself, is this reinforcing a belief I already have or challenging it? Does it align with the dominant narrative that I hear in the real world, or is it offering a counter perspective? A fantasy book might show a rebellion from the perspective of the ruling class, and then suddenly you're thinking about real-world revolutions. A romance might normalize emotional manipulation as passion. Now you're wondering why that trope gets romanticized so often. It is not about agreeing or disagreeing. It's about listening for what the story is saying and how it speaks to what you think you already know. It is not about being on the hunt for problematic content. It's about realizing that fiction is never created in a vacuum. Every book is in conversation with something: culture, history, power structure. And asking these questions helps you hear that conversation more clearly. It helps you read beyond the surface and find the story underneath the story. And here's the key: these questions aren't tests. They're invitations. They don't have to lead to big debates or critical essays. Sometimes they just help you to see why a scene gave you goosebumps, or why something made you squirm. They turn the act of reading into a layered experience, where the story can be both enjoyable and thought-provoking. You are not asking these questions to be a book snob. You're asking them to get more out of what you are already enjoying. For example, and while I'm going to talk about the adaptation, there is a book, I just haven't read it yet. A few weeks ago, I was having a really rough day, and I needed a comfort watch. So I sat down and pulled up North and South on my Roku. Hello, editing Steph here. When I was editing, I realized that I had two different levels of footage because of just how much space my phone has. So a whole portion of my argument got cut because I thought it had recorded in the first segment, but then it hadn't, and so I skipped it in the second segment. So just for the sake of continuing the argument, I'm going to read what I had written for that. I'm reading it instead of trying to say it naturally because I want to make this kind of interlude as quick as possible. So here we go. Let me tell you, watching what's going on now in the US between the upper class and the working class is very eye-opening when watching North and South. And the story does a great job of examining capitalism and industry from all angles. The unethical masters who just want to keep costs as low as possible to maximize their profit stand out in contrast to our romantic hero John, the ethical master. He doesn't oppose raising wages because it will cut into his profits, but because he's already spent the profits on equipment that will increase the longevity of his workers, not out of some sense of morality, but out of the practicality of lowering risk and long-term success over short-term gains. But it's this long-term thinking that allows John and Nicholas to come into an agreement agreement that will benefit everyone. The plight of Nicholas and the working class, suffering in increasingly desperate circumstances and still fighting for what's fair, stands out in stark contrast to the poor Boucher whose whole family suffers because of the union strike. Our heroine, Margaret, has the privilege of an upper-class education and upbringing and views the world in an idealistic way as opposed to our incredibly practical hero, who she starts off as viewing as despicable because she doesn't fully wish to embrace the harsh realities of her new circumstances. Everything to her is black and white, north and south, until she, like the viewer, learns all of the nuances of the real situation. Before recent events, I understood these things on an intellectual level, but I didn't feel it like I do now. What was once a comfort watch, while still incredibly enjoyable, suddenly had a lot more nuance in a way that wasn't the comfort that I was needing at the time, but deepened my emotional connection to the story because of the complexities and the ties that I was able to make in what's going on in the real world today. Here's the shift that changes everything. When you approach critical reading with curiosity instead of judgment, you stop killing the vibe and start expanding it. Take Daughter of the Blood by Anne Bishop, for example. On the surface, it's a dark fantasy with powerful magic systems, courtly drama, and a prophesied heroine. Read for vibes and you'll find lush writing and a lot of romantic tension. But read it critically and whew! You'll also find a deeply unsettling depiction of power, trauma, and violence, particularly around the themes of child abuse. Bishop doesn't shy away from depicting an incredibly dark world, and it's hard not to feel how her own experience with abuse helped shape the story. Janelle's trauma isn't just there for shock value. It's the foundation of her character's strength and the world's brokenness. The way abuse is institutionalized and justified in the story reflects the insidiousness of real-world structures that harm the vulnerable while protecting the powerful. And that makes the story resonate differently. It's heavy, but it also makes Janelle's rise feel powerful, like her reclaiming of agency is meaningful because of how the world is. The story isn't just about magic and politics. It's about surviving something horrible and still having hope. The relationship between Janelle and Damon is where things get particularly tricky. On the surface, it's a fated mate's slow burn, but he's an adult and she's a child for much of the first book. And that can make people understandably uncomfortable, even when there isn't actual grooming taking place. And what actually makes Damon stand out is the fact that he's not willing to take advantage of her, when many other characters would or do. The fact that this book brings these heavy issues to light doesn't make it worthless. But it does mean readers, especially survivors, might have a very different emotional response. Recognizing that doesn't diminish the story. It makes your engagement with it more human. So who is this book for? Maybe it's for readers who can hold tension, who find strength in dark narratives, and who wants to see what it looks like when the world burns but the heroine still chooses love. But that doesn't mean that it's safe or soft. And that's okay. Critical reading isn't about finding books that don't make you uncomfortable. It's about knowing when and why that discomfort matters. Critical reading Daughter of the Blood didn't ruin it for me. It made me more aware. It made me more intentional about what I take away from it. It added weight to my reactions instead of replacing them. So yes, you can be a vibe reader and a critical reader. You can tab for tropes and underline moments of injustice. You can squeal at the kiss and notice the dynamic underneath. And remember, reading is a subjective experience, and that's okay. Books can be fun and meaningful. You don't have to choose. If this helped you, you should check out my other video about how to create a strong story premise, because thinking about stories in this way may also make you a better writer. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.